A black woman boards a Delta flight just hoping to read her child a bedtime story that night, but within minutes, the pilot humiliates her in front of everyone. What he didn't know? She's the deputy administrator of the FAA. And just 7 minutes later, he starts losing everything. This is not just a story of karma. It's a story about power, dignity, and what happens when justice flies higher than arrogance. Stay with me. A black woman boards a Delta flight just hoping to read her child a bedtime story that night. But within minutes, the pilot humiliates her in front of everyone. What he didn't know? She's the deputy administrator of the FAA. And just 7 minutes later, his entire career begins to unravel. What happened on that plane isn't just about arrogance or authority. It's about America, our daily rituals, our quiet prejudices, and the moments when power finally meets accountability. Stay with me. This is not a story you'll want to miss. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, share it. Someone you know might need to hear it too. It began, as these things often do, in silence. The kind of quiet that doesn't raise suspicion, only expectations. Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, a crossroads of a million lives. On this spring morning, it brimmed with all the rhythms of the everyday. Parents pleading with children, the buzz of business calls, lovers saying quick goodbyes. No one notices the black woman in the navy blazer. Not yet. Her name is Alicia Grant. Her steps are measured, not because she's unsure of herself, but because years of travel have trained her to conserve energy, to observe, to listen. The way black women in America often learn to move through the world, graceful, invisible until we are not. She doesn't carry herself like someone important, not in the way they expect. And that, I suspect, is the first strike against her. You see, America often expects its authority to wear a certain face. White, male, loud. Alicia, instead, is quiet. She's the deputy administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration. But she doesn't flash credentials. She flies commercials not to enjoy luxury, but to stay close to the people she serves. A kind of integrity that doesn't shout. At security, she's polite. To the gate agent, she offers a warm smile. She moves through this world as many of us do, knowing full well that to be black in public is to be on trial without cause. She finds a seat by the window, close to the gate. She watches the runways, a lover of flight. There's poetry in airplanes, engineering and defiance, all at once. But poetry rarely survives contact with authority. That's when he enters. Captain Lawrence Tyler. 25 years in the sky. White hair. Proud jaw. A man who speaks as though the world still operates on 1950s rules, where a pilot's word is gospel and women, especially black ones, ought to know their place. He doesn't notice Alicia. Not yet. Why would he? She sits in economy, not first class. She doesn't wear a badge. She doesn't bend when he passes. He greets the white gate agent with a slight nod, a move he's practiced like punctuation. But even that gesture is absent when he walks past the young black man in uniform cleaning the floor. It's not rage. It's something more dangerous, habitual disregard. That's how racism often lives now. Not in slurs shouted on corners, but in silences, exclusions, and glances that say, "You do not belong here." Boarding begins. Alicia steps up with Group 3. The gate agent, young, white, clearly new, smiles at her like she's any other passenger. "Have a great flight," he says. Alicia nods back. On board, the air is warm. A scent of disinfectant, mingled with burnt coffee. She tucks her bag into the overhead bin. She helps a mother struggling with a car seat. She smiles at a law student beside her, remembering her own son, his laughter before bedtime. The flight attendant makes the usual announcements. Seatbelts. Exit rows. Safety. Everything is routine. Until it isn't. There is a commotion in first class. Voices rise, sharp, clipped. A woman, mid-40s, white, is having trouble finding overhead space. A flight attendant tries to help. Then comes his voice. Not the attendant. The pilot. Captain Tyler. Dripping with authority. If you can't follow instructions, maybe you're not ready to fly, he says. You can't shove your bag wherever you like. This isn't a Greyhound bus. The plane goes silent. The woman's face flushes. She tries to explain. The attendant stammers. Tyler steps into the aisle, towering, smug. It isn't about the bag. It never is. It's about control. And Alicia feels it. That shift. That unspoken rule. When whiteness feels challenged, it flexes. He scans the cabin as he returns to the cockpit. His eyes pass over Alicia, once. No nod. No flicker of recognition. Just the look that says, "You're in my domain now." She exhales, turns her face back to the window. But something in her spirit hardens. Not from offense, but recognition. She's seen it before. On trains, at conferences, in boardrooms, and yes, on planes. The quiet ways some men wield power. And the quieter ways Black women learn to carry theirs. It won't be until later, until the plane is in the sky and Tyler is barking orders through the intercom like a frustrated schoolmaster, that Alicia's mind begins to tally the infractions. The unnecessary turbulence warnings. The order to suspend beverage service. The scolding tone. The condescension. She says nothing. Not yet. But in her notebook, between thoughts of new aviation tech, she writes one line. This flight needs to be remembered. And what will she do next? Well, that's where the story begins to climb. There is a moment, just after takeoff, when the world below fades, when buildings shrink and streets unravel into lines of memory. Up here, the clouds pretend peace. But peace, my dear, is often a performance. Especially when it comes draped in uniforms and polished authority. The plane climbed smoothly. The engines hummed with precision. But inside that aircraft, something far less mechanical stirred. Something older than flight itself. Something ancestral. It began, once more, with the voice. The voice of Captain Lawrence Tyler. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We've encountered some mild turbulence, nothing serious, but I'd appreciate it if passengers used some common sense. Stay seated unless absolutely necessary. Common sense. A phrase like a whip wrapped in velvet. Because in this country, common sense is often code for knowing your place. The law student beside Alicia looked up, confused. A few heads turned. The turbulence was barely perceptible, but the warning was heavy. Alicia didn't speak. Not yet. But something curled in her stomach, not from the altitude, but from recognition. Tyler's voice returned 15 minutes later. This time, he wasn't asking. He was commanding. Flight attendants, discontinue service. That's an order. The carts stopped mid-aisle. A young attendant, Joshua, blinked then obeyed, his lips parted as if to protest, but quickly sealed by years of unspoken lessons. And, just like that, the cabin grew thirsty. A baby cried. A diabetic man pressed his call button. Alicia looked around. Passengers murmured. Faces shifted from confusion to discomfort. The turbulence had passed. But Captain Tyler had not. Now, let me be clear. This wasn't about water. It wasn't about juice or peanuts. It was about power. The kind that needs no justification beyond a uniform and a tone. You see, racism isn't always a slur or a burning cross. Often, it's a pilot choosing when to serve you because he can. It's in how comfort is rationed. How dignity is suspended, not by gravity, but by choice. Alicia stood to go to the lavatory. The seatbelt sign was off. She walked past sleeping passengers, past restless legs and quiet signs. Near the cockpit, she paused. Captain Tyler was outside the door, speaking to Joshua in a hushed but cutting voice. You don't get to think, Tyler said. When I say shut it down, you shut it down. Understand? Joshua nodded, eyes lowered, the way so many have learned to lower their eyes, not out of respect, but survival. Alicia caught his glance. Brief. Ashamed. And Captain Tyler turned. Their eyes met. Now let me tell you something, dear reader. When a black woman meets the stare of a white man who believes himself untouchable, the moment is never neutral. He looked at her as if to say, "What are you doing here? Who let you stand this close to the cockpit door? Don't you know how this works?" Alicia didn't flinch. She nodded. He sneered, and then, like history itself, he disappeared behind the door. Back at her seat, Alicia felt the tension of the plane differently now. The baby still cried. The diabetic man still hadn't received water. The mother from first class, the one who had dared speak about her overhead bin, now sat stiff, her hands curled into her lap like evidence. And all around them, the silence spoke louder than the engines. Because we know, don't we, that silence is how power defends itself. It gaslights. It ignores. It dares you to make a scene so it can call you the problem. When the turbulence returned, it was real this time. A quick dip. A gasp from passengers. The plane shook, not violently, but enough to remind everyone, you are not in control. Captain Tyler's voice rang out again, harsher now. Flight attendants, secure the cabin. No exceptions. Passengers remain seated. Don't do anything foolish. The word foolish echoed. And that word was centuries old. Of black men called boys. Of black women dismissed as hysterical. Of our pain labeled as overreaction. Alicia's hands gripped the armrests. Not from fear of falling, but from rage. Not loud, not reckless, but quiet and righteous. And let me tell you something, righteous black rage is the most disciplined kind there is. It doesn't erupt. It records. It doesn't scream. It strategizes. She made note of the exact words, the inflection, the gaze. And in that notebook, between FAA meeting notes and airport compliance metrics, she wrote, "A man like this flies above us all, yet looks down on everyone." There are stories that unfold in headlines. And then there are the stories that unfold in coach at 30,000 feet, in the spaces where black dignity is tested not by bullets, but by belittlement. That day, Alicia sat quietly, but every breath she took was loaded with the weight of every black passenger who had ever been scolded, dismissed, or ignored. Captain Tyler thought he'd won something that day. He thought silence meant submission. But what he didn't know, what men like him never quite understand, is that some passengers board a plane with more than a ticket. They carry power. They carry history. They carry witnesses. And in Alicia's silence, a storm was already forming. Not of weather, but of reckoning. There is a kind of pain that moves like smoke, unseen, but everywhere. It doesn't knock you over. It seeps in, through the smallest cracks, the microtones, the microaggressions. That's the world Alicia Grant flew through. Not above it, not beside it, but within it. As the plane coasted over Virginia, she wasn't sipping ginger ale or flipping through Sky magazine like the others. She was building something. A case. A reckoning. A slow, deliberate justice. Because you see, when you live your life as a black woman in America, you are not just breathing air. You are breathing evidence. Every sigh, every glance, every silence carries weight. And Alicia had long ago learned how to weigh it. It started with a whisper. A passenger across the aisle leaned in to the woman beside her. "Why does he sound so angry?" "We barely moved." The woman responded softly. "It's like he's punishing us for being here." Alicia didn't interrupt. She didn't have to. The truth was beginning to circulate, like cabin air, impossible to contain. Then came the call button. Joshua, the flight attendant, came walking down the aisle with a kind of stiffness in his spine, the kind men learn after being barked at too many times by men like Captain Tyler. The passenger, an older black gentleman, raised a polite hand. "Son, I know you're just doing your job, but I need a little water. My medication." "I understand, sir," Joshua said quickly, eyes darting to the front. "I'll do what I can." Alicia watched him walk away, not with guilt, but with the sorrow of recognition. She had walked that same line, the tightrope between serving and surviving, between professionalism and submission. Now let us be honest. This moment, this entire flight, might have gone undocumented, lost to the thousands of indignities that vanish every day into the silence of polite society. But something had changed, and it wasn't turbulent. It was the way the crew's shoulders had tensed, the way passengers whispered, the way Tyler's voice grew louder, not because the skies grew rougher, but because someone aboard was not shrinking the way he was used to. Then, a small moment, seemingly insignificant. A mother, struggling with a crying toddler, pressed her button. Again, Joshua arrived, empty-handed. "I'm sorry," he said, almost choking on it. "Captain has ordered that all services stop. We're not allowed to get anything right now." The woman blinked, tired. "Even for a baby?" Joshua glanced down. "Even for a baby." And at that moment, the entire cabin shifted. This wasn't about safety. It was about submission. And submission, when demanded without compassion, becomes violence. Alicia opened her bag and pulled out her FAA issue notepad. She didn't write in anger. No exclamation points. No scrawled fury. She wrote like a surgeon moves, precise, measured, focused. Flight 763, Delta Airlines, ATL to DCA. Captain exhibiting aggressive tone throughout. Multiple passengers denied service during stable air. Flight attendant reprimanded publicly. Tone, abusive. Atmosphere, tense. Unsafe? Not physically. Psychologically, absolutely. Now you may ask, why didn't she speak up? Why not stand up and say who she was? Because Alicia understood something many don't. In this country, a Black woman's truth must be airtight. Not just accurate. Not just valid. But unimpeachable. Because if she had stood then, mid-flight, said, "I am the deputy administrator of the FAA," what would they have called her? Entitled. Emotional. Overreacting. All the words America keeps in its holster for women like her. So she waited. And she watched. Because justice, when rooted in patience, is unstoppable. She turned to her seatmate, the young law student who had been quiet all this time. "Can I ask," Alicia said gently, "have you noticed anything unusual?" The young man looked surprised, then nodded slowly. "Honestly? Yeah." The captain's tone. "It's been kind of harsh. Like he's trying to make a point." Alicia smiled. "You'd make a fine witness." The young man chuckled nervously, unsure if she was joking. She wasn't. Meanwhile, Tyler, still perched high in his throne behind the locked door, barked another announcement. "Seat belts on. No exceptions. We will be landing shortly. Please refrain from any unnecessary movement." But it was too late. The movement had already begun. Not in the aisles, but in hearts. In the invisible shift that happens when people realize they are not crazy. That they are not alone in what they feel. You see, the most insidious part of prejudice isn't the act itself. It's the doubt it plants in the mind of the one who suffers it. Was it just me? Am I overreacting? Maybe he's just having a bad day. But today, on this flight, the doubt was dying. Because the evidence was everywhere. And Alicia? She was collecting it. Not with a gun or a badge, but with a pen. And let me remind you, in the right hands, a pen can level an empire. As the plane descended over Washington, D.C., she looked out the window. Monuments, shadows, domes of old promises. She whispered to herself, more a vow than a thought. He thinks this flight ends when we land. But it doesn't. This story is only the beginning. Justice, like truth, does not move on a flight schedule. It arrives when it's ready. And when it lands, it does not ask for permission. There comes a time, in every person's journey through America, when the weight of knowing becomes unbearable. When silence, no longer a shield, becomes a shackle. Alicia Grant had spent a lifetime learning when to speak and when to stay silent. She had mastered the art of patience, because Black women in this country are taught that speaking too soon costs us everything, and speaking too late costs others. And now, as Flight 763 began its descent into Washington, D.C., her body remained still, but her spirit had begun to quake. For what do you do when you are both witness and judge? What do you do when you carry not just power, but the burden of using it rightly? The plane dipped. Not violently. Just enough for every heart to lift half a beat in suspense. Another announcement crackled overhead. Flight attendants, secure the cabin. No exceptions. Passengers, do not act foolishly. Again, foolishly. That word. It stuck in Alicia's ear like a thorn. Because when men like Tyler say foolish, they do not mean careless. They mean defiant. They mean Black. They mean anyone who refuses to shrink. She glanced at Joshua, the young flight attendant, whose smile now seemed like a bandage barely covering a wound. She looked at the mother with the crying child, who clutched her baby tighter, afraid her very presence was an inconvenience. She saw the old man who had asked for water, lips dry, dignity cracked. And Alicia, even in silence, felt their eyes beginning to turn toward her. Not because they knew who she was, but because there's something in the way a person holds themselves when they're holding back a storm. You see, my friend, we live in a nation that romanticizes justice but fears confrontation. We are taught to believe in due process, but punished for disturbing the peace, even when the peace is built on pain. Alicia had every right to do nothing. To walk off that plane, return to her office, and bury this incident beneath a pile of bureaucracy. And yet, how many others had done just that? How many times has silence been mistaken for consent? As the plane wheels touched the ground with a jolt, Alicia gripped the armrests, not out of fear, but decision. The cabin erupted with a smattering of applause, the nervous kind. The kind that says, we made it. Let's never speak of it again. But Alicia knew this flight would follow her. Not because of turbulence, but because of the truth. She stood. Slowly, deliberately. Captain Tyler had exited the cockpit, standing at the front, surveying passengers as if they were suspects in his private court. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He judged. And when Alicia approached, their eyes locked again. He didn't know her name. Not yet. But he knew what she represented, a disruption to his comfort, a mirror to his flaws. She said nothing, only nodded. He grunted. Have a good day, ma'am. The ma'am landed like gravel in a glass. Forced. Hollow. And Alicia walked past him, not as a woman humiliated, but as a woman ascending. For you must understand, power is not always loud. Sometimes it walks in flats, carries a slim briefcase, and takes careful notes. Outside the terminal, her assistant Isabella greeted her. Young, sharp, eyes like open books. How was your flight? Alicia paused, then quietly replied, we need to talk. But not here. In the car, away from the crowds, Alicia laid out the facts, clinical, clear, like a surgeon reviewing x-rays. But beneath every word was an unspoken truth. This isn't about one bad flight. This is about a system that lets men like Tyler stay in the air because their arrogance flies under the radar. Isabella, already scribbling on a tablet, asked gently, do we file an official complaint? Alicia nodded. We begin. But quietly. I want this clean. No headlines. Just the truth. But if it's you, Isabella said, they'll come for you. I know, Alicia said. That's why we don't flinch. Now pause with me, dear reader. Let us not rush past this moment. This was not a scandal. Not yet. It was something far more dangerous, a woman with power choosing to use it responsibly. And that terrifies this country more than anything else. Not riots, not resistance, but a Black woman who refuses to be silent, who wields her authority with discipline, who documents harm without spectacle, and who knows the system well enough to turn its gears from within. Later that night, Alicia sat alone in her office. The city hummed outside, car horns, metro rumble, distant sirens. She reviewed FAA conduct guidelines, reread flight transcripts, drafted a letter. Polite, precise, powerful. She did not mention that she was on the flight, only that the FAA had received reports of unprofessional behavior from a senior Delta captain. She signed it. Alicia Grant, Deputy Administrator, Federal Aviation Administration. Then she whispered to herself, "Now let's see what truth does when you give it wings." The thing about justice in America, when it finally moves, it does not move like thunder. It moves like a whisper at first. A filing, a forwarded memo, a hushed meeting in a government hallway. But what begins in silence can end in rupture. And Alicia Grant, having lived long enough to see how silence is weaponized, chose to answer it with precision. The morning after her flight, she returned to her office not as a victim, but as a vessel. Her name had now been affixed to a letter that demanded answers. Not revenge. Not punishment. Just clarity. Because clarity, in a world wrapped in politeness and protocol, is the most radical act of all. She didn't want blood. She wanted truth, audited, corroborated, undeniable. The FAA's Compliance Division launched a preliminary inquiry. Witnesses were contacted. Flight records requested. The cockpit voice recordings were preserved. Alicia, careful to maintain impartiality, assigned 2 subordinates to oversee the investigation. She included her own name on the passenger manifest, but instructed them, "Treat every passenger equally, including me." Now, my dear reader, that's not just professionalism. That is a kind of grace this nation rarely returns. To hold power and not bend it for personal vindication, that is the quiet burden of those who have carried centuries on their backs. Across the country, in a Delta operations office in Atlanta, a man named Captain Tyler received an email. A meeting, no details. Just urgent. He thought it was nothing. Another complaint from another oversensitive passenger. What he didn't know, what men like him never expect, is that this time, the complaint bore the name of someone with enough power to shatter his shield. When Tyler stepped into the office of Delta's Director of Flight Operations, he still wore his arrogance like a medal. Until he saw the letter. FAA seal. Deputy Administrator Alicia Grant. His jaw stiffened. He remembered her, not her name, but her presence. The poise. The silence that had unsettled him. He had written her off as another passenger with too many opinions. Now she was the storm behind the clouds. "You're being investigated," the director said. "Formally. By the FAA." Tyler bristled. "For what?" "I followed the procedure. Passenger mistreatment. Abuse of authority. Hostile in-flight environment. Disruption of crew function." He scoffed. "This is political. This is over a tone of voice." The director's eyes did not waver. "Captain, times have changed. You may have flown through storms, but this one is not in the sky. And here we must pause, not for pity, but for recognition. Men like Tyler believe themselves invincible not because they are evil, but because the world has rewarded them for decades simply for being who they are. They mistake tenure for moral immunity. They mistake silence for consent. But silence had found its match. Meanwhile, back in D.C., Alicia moved through her day with the weight of many eyes. Some looked at her with pride, others with suspicion. Whispers began to float through the agency's upper ranks. Why this case? Why now? Is it personal? Is it racial? Of course it was personal. Of course it was racial. That's how racism works. It disguises itself as professionalism, then blames the wounded for noticing. But Alicia said nothing. She let the tape speak. She let the witnesses speak. And oh, did they speak? Joshua, the young flight attendant, gave a statement. His voice shook. Not from fear of lying, but from the courage of truth. He yelled at me in front of passengers, he said. I was just trying to do my job. Serve water. Help a baby stop crying. He made me feel like a threat. Like I was out of line for showing kindness. Others confirmed it. The diabetic man, the mother in first class, the law student. A pattern emerged, not of one bad day, but of a culture. A cockpit turned into a throne, a voice turned into a weapon, a flight turned into a lesson in quiet humiliation. The cockpit audio didn't include slurs. It didn't need to. It included tones, phrases. Shut it down. They can wait. I don't care what he thinks. It included contempt. And contempt, recorded and replayed, sounds a lot like truth with the mask off. But with the truth came resistance. Tyler had friends. He had union reps. He had media contacts. And one of them leaked the story. Not the whole truth, mind you, but a distorted version. FAA official targets veteran pilots. Personal grudge? Reverse racism. The headline lit up certain corners of the internet like dry brush in summer. And now the fight was no longer just about one flight. It was about what kind of country we claim to be. The backlash came. Emails, calls, some with praise, some with venom. You're trying to ruin a good man's life. You're making it about race. It's always about race with people like you. And Alicia, sitting at her desk, read every word. She didn't flinch. Because you cannot destroy a woman who has been taught, since girlhood, to expect resistance the moment she stands. She called a staff meeting. They gathered in a small room, lawyers, investigators, junior aides. And Alicia said, with calm fire, "We are not punishing a man for being stern. We are holding a professional accountable for creating fear where there should be safety. This isn't about hurt feelings. This is about passenger dignity. And yes, when that dignity is denied disproportionately to people who look like me, we name it. That is not vengeance. That is policy." You see, there are moments in this country, rare and precious, when truth walks into the room and is not asked to leave. And in that moment, Alicia Grant did not just hold her ground. She expanded it. This was no longer a story about turbulence. It was a story about who gets to fly freely and who must earn their humanity at 35,000 feet. The tragedy of this country, and perhaps its most enduring lie, is that it claims to love the truth until that truth begins to speak in a black woman's voice. And when that voice carries authority, when it does not tremble, when it does not smile to soften the blow, oh, how quickly it becomes labeled as dangerous. So now, here we are. Alicia Grant, Deputy Administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration, has spoken. Not loudly, not emotionally, not with vengeance. She filed a report. She followed protocol. And in doing so, she did what many before her never dared. She asked the system to hold one of its own accountable. And the system did what it often does. It recoiled. The smear campaign began like all cowardly things do, anonymously. A blog post, written by a concerned aviation source, appeared overnight. Veteran white pilot suspended after complaint by high-ranking FAA official. Overreach? Or racism in reverse? That phrase, racism in reverse, always makes me pause. As though a mirror, when finally held up, is itself the injustice. Suddenly, Alicia's face appeared in headlines she never asked for. Her credentials were reduced to footnotes. Her character dissected. The whispers turned into questions. And the questions, cloaked in polite diction, dripped with accusation. Was she trying to make an example out of Tyler? Did she overreact? Was it really about race? Always that question. Was it really about race? As though race is a weather pattern, a passing condition, not the very air we've all been breathing since this nation drew its first breath. Inside the FAA, the heat grew. Alicia was summoned into a closed-door meeting. Wood-paneled walls. Men in suits. A few women. Fewer faces like hers. The administrator, a man who had once praised her for her composure, opened the meeting. "Alicia," he said, "we support due process. But the optics, they're becoming difficult. The optics. Not the truth. Not the evidence. The optics. Because when a black woman demands justice, she is not judged by her methods, but by her audacity. They do not say, Prove your case. They say, lower your voice. Alicia answered calmly. I filed this complaint not as a black woman, not as a political act, but as a regulator charged with public safety. I did not lead the investigation. I did not give interviews. I followed the rules. Ask yourselves, would this meeting exist if I were not the one who signed the letter? There was silence. Because the answer was no. But no one wanted to say it. And somewhere, hundreds of miles away, Captain Lawrence Tyler, grounded and stewing in his Atlanta condominium, read the headlines. His face on Fox Affiliates. His name is trending. Hero pilot punished for being firm. Is this the end of old-school leadership? Has wokeness infiltrated the skies? And though no one said it outright, the undertone was always the same. He was white. She was black. He was the victim. Tyler, desperate to reclaim control, called in an old favor. A journalist. A man who owed him. Tell the truth, Tyler said. This woman, she's making it personal. She's trying to ruin me. And so it went. A smear piece, saturated with innuendo and framed as a warning. When bureaucrats fly too high. The article implied Alicia had boarded with an agenda. That she had baited the captain. That the FAA was now run by radicals who wanted to discipline pilots for being masculine. It didn't matter that none of it was true. It mattered only that it sounded familiar. Because America, my dear friend, does not require lies to be believed. Only familiar fears whispered in reliable accents. Alicia read the article at her kitchen table. Her son is asleep upstairs. The dishwasher humming. The night pressing against the window. She did not cry. She did not scream. She did not fold. She called her assistant. Set a meeting. Internal only. We're moving forward. The next day, she stood before her team. Many were younger than her. Some had never seen a woman, let alone a black woman, weather such a public storm with such terrifying stillness. I want you all to remember something, she said. They want us to be afraid of backlash. But I am not afraid of their noise. I am afraid of what happens when we let fear silence the facts. We will let the evidence speak. We will not make this personal. We will make it accountable. And they believed her. Because her voice, even under fire, did not tremble. But the world outside was no longer quiet. Aviation blogs picked up the drama. Conservative radio hosts twisted the story into a parable. She wanted her coffee served just so. She felt slighted. She had a chip on her shoulder. All of it rooted in the same old fear. That a black woman might recognize her own worth and not apologize for it. Still, Alicia pressed on. The FAA's legal team finalized its case. The cockpit recordings were cataloged. Passenger testimonies reviewed. Joshua's statement, quiet but damning, was labeled corroborated. And still, she kept her distance. No intervention. No interference. Only resolve. Then came the summons. Captain Tyler would stand before the review board. He would speak. He would deny. And the system would have to decide. Does professionalism include cruelty? Does discipline include contempt? And most of all, does a pilot's uniform absolve him of his humanity? That hearing, my friend, would be the crucible. Not just for Tyler, but for the country. Because behind every headline, behind every accusation, behind every reverse racism cry, lies a deeper question. When power is finally held to account, will we protect it or will we dare to evolve? We often speak of landings as though the hardest part of the journey is keeping a machine in the air. But I have found the hardest part is returning to Earth. Returning to a world that still resists what it already knows. Returning to systems that remain unchanged, even as truth crashes into them like thunder. Returning to people who saw the whole thing, heard the recordings, read the testimonies, and still ask, was it really that serious? But Alicia Grant knew, as every honest black soul in America knows. The landing is never soft when you speak truth to a system designed for your silence. The hearing was over. The verdict was written. The news cycle is already turning its restless eye toward the next scandal, the next outrage. But Alicia remained, at her desk, at her post, still watching the skies. Because the truth, my friend, is not a moment. It is a discipline. In the weeks that followed, emails trickled in. Some anonymous, cruel. Others are grateful, quietly brave. One flight attendant wrote, "He did this to others too. I never said anything. Thank you for saying what we couldn't." A Black mother sent a letter. "I flew with my son last month. For once, someone reminded the world that we belong in the sky, too." And from Joshua, just a note, handwritten. "You didn't save me. You reminded me I'm worth saving." But not all was applause. There were internal reviews. Questions from Senate aides. A quiet visit from someone high up who said, "Alicia, you did everything by the book. But next time, maybe, let the airline handle it first." Let the airline handle it. The same airline that let Captain Tyler fly for 25 years unchecked. And in that moment, Alicia understood. Accountability in this country is always conditional. It must never be embarrassing. It must never threaten. It must never, ever rise in the voice of a Black woman. She met with the administrator again, this time, not in defense, but in declaration. "If my actions jeopardize the comfort of those unwilling to evolve," she said, "then let them be uncomfortable. I am not here to manage their peace. I am here to protect the dignity of every soul who steps onto a plane, regardless of how quietly they suffer." He didn't argue. But his silence was not consent. And what of Captain Tyler? He served his suspension, returned. But he no longer flew with the same certainty. Eyes followed him. Flight attendants no longer whispered in fear, they filed reports. Passengers complained more quickly. Because once the mirror is held up, it cannot be unseen. He flew, yes. But the air had changed. And no man, no matter how proud, can fly above accountability forever. One morning, Alicia walked the terminal at Reagan National. She often did this, unnoticed, without fanfare. She watched the lines, the workers, the mothers juggling strollers and carry-ons. And in the hum of overhead announcements, she heard something else. The quiet dignity of people who have always flown below the radar, now seen. A man in a wheelchair smiled at her. A young Latina agent nodded as she passed. And a child, maybe 6, pointed and whispered, "She's the airplane lady." Alicia smiled. Not because she was proud, but because the work, the real work, is never done in applause. It is done in presence. And then she saw her. The woman from the flight. The one Captain Tyler had scolded over the overhead bin. She stood at gate B12, ticket in hand. Their eyes met. And the woman mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." Not loudly, not dramatically, but with that rarest of expressions in this country, recognition. Not just of help rendered, but of shared survival. You see, the story of Alicia Grant was never about triumph. It was about a witness. Because this nation, your nation, my dear elders, has always demanded that we prove our pain. That we document every insult. That we translate every slight into legal language. And when we finally do, when we gather the facts, follow the process, conduct ourselves with unwavering dignity, we are still asked to justify our tone, our timing, our existence. But Alicia's story teaches us something urgent. Justice isn't the end of the fight. It is proof that we were right to fight at all. So now, let us land the story where it belongs, not in courts or newspapers, but in your heart. The next time you see a Black woman sit quietly on a plane, or walk calmly through security, or reach to stow her bag overhead, remember, she may be carrying more than luggage. She may be carrying us all, through the storm, across the silence, toward a more honest sky.